Welcome to the PortaCount Academy, and thank you for attending ResFit 205 analysis of the daily checks and the real-time fit factor display. My name is John Morton, and my email address is john.morton@tsi.com. If you have any questions after this course, please feel free to contact me for help. Now, this course is intended to provide a greater understanding of the daily checks and the purpose behind performing the daily checks, and within the same discussion, how we can troubleshoot those daily checks if and when we do run into an issue. We are also going to discuss the real-time fit factor display and specifically how it can help us troubleshoot both the zero check and the ambient particle check. Now, during the presentation, you may see this small purple arrow appear, and this represents a touch on the touch screen of the PortaCount Pro unit. The screen captures in this presentation are based off of standalone operations, but the FitPro software operations will look almost identical. For this class, it may be helpful for you to follow along on your own PortaCount Pro unit, so take some time to make sure you've got the necessary equipment. This would include, obviously, the PortaCount Pro unit, the blue and clear twin tube assembly, the alcohol cartridge, preferably one that has been recently soaked in the necessary alcohol, and the zero check filter or HEPA filter. We want to start by inserting the alcohol cartridge into the PortaCount Pro. Then we will power on the PortaCount Pro and connect the twin tube assembly to the blue and silver ports shown here. Now, here's some terms you're going to hear many times during this presentation, so let's define these now. The daily checks should be done each day of fit testing in order to make sure that the PortaCount Pro unit is functioning properly and that the environment you are in is appropriate for performing fit tests. If you know you'll be fit testing both full face and half face masks and N95 filtering face pieces, then you should run two daily checks, one with the N95 option enabled and one without. We're going to see that option in just a little bit. The ambient particle concentration is also referred to as ambient aerosol or particle counts. Any mixture of those five words will roughly mean the same thing. Now, during the fit test, this is the sample that is pulled down the blue tubing. Conversely, the mask concentration or the mask sample would be pulled down the clear tubing. I have a picture here to help visualize what we mean specifically by the word concentration. Literally, how many particles are within a specific volume of air. And in our case, we're looking at how many particles are within a cubic centimeter. I'd like to begin this class by stepping through the daily checks process so as to familiarize yourself with the various screens and the daily check options. So from the touch screen of the PortaCount Pro, I want you to tap on the daily check icon. After selecting to do most operations on the PortaCount, you're going to be prompted to select an active database for which to save the data to. To select the database, touch on the drop-down arrow to the left of the screen. For the purposes of this training, if you do not have a flash drive connected with a database available, just select Demo Training Mode, and then select Load. Once we get the successfully loaded message, we can press Exit and leave. Now, for those of you operating the PortaCount Pro Plus Model 8038, you will have an option to enable the N95 feature. If you would like to go ahead and enable your N95, select that option now. You may also see an option for valve check. This is not part of the daily checks and is only used by TSI during our calibration procedures. The enable valve check option should remain unchecked. Before we start our daily checks, though, I would like you to tap on the Settings button. As you take a moment to look around the daily check settings screen, I want to define some of the settings that are displayed. The first one across the top should be the minimum particle check. This determines if we have enough particles in the environment to adequately challenge the mask so that we can run a proper fit test. The classifier check, this setting is not going to be displayed on the screen or on the settings screen, but it will be a part of the daily checks for those of you that have enabled their N95 companion. It only occurs when the N95 has been enabled. It's a simple internal electronic check for the N95 device. The next setting displayed is the zero check. The zero check tells us if there are any leaks in the PortaCount unit or if the PortaCount tubing has any leaks. If there were a leak here in the tubing or the PortaCount, it would cause us to falsely fail our fit tests, because the PortaCount would see those particles that were leaking in as particles that leaked in from the mask. The final daily check setting is the maximum fit factor. This tests the internal switching valve to make sure that it is fully switched from ambient or blue tubing to mask or clear tubing. Now here we see the screen that you, if you're able to follow along, that you should be seeing as well. At the top we see the minimum ambient particle level. Now for the N95 enabled PortaCount, this value is 30 particles per cc. Those running an 8030 PortaCount or an 8038, which does not have the N95 enabled, should see a value of 1,000. These values are set at these minimums in order to provide a sufficient challenge to the respirator. So if, for example, you only had 5 particles per cc in the air, it really wouldn't be much of a challenge for the respirator to keep those particles out. So we really want to make sure we have a sufficient challenge. Below this we see our values for the zero check. This refers to how many particles can individually be counted during 30 seconds while the HEPA filter is being applied. This is the only value in here which may need to be adjusted. And I say may need to be adjusted if it has been adjusted too low. The default is 30, and I would recommend that you leave it at the default of 30. Below this, we see the maximum fit factor value. These can remain the same. We derive the maximum fit factor by doing a fake fit test exercise with the HEPA filter in place. Because we have the HEPA filter on the mask line still, we should get an almost perfect fit test. So we're looking for an extremely high fit factor. At this point, you can go ahead and touch exit so that we can return to the daily checks screen. The first step to the daily checks is again the minimum ambient particle check. We need to be sure that the ends of the blue and clear tubing are open to the ambient air. So as the instructions say, remove the HEPA filter from the sample inlet. Then press the Start button. During the minimum particle check, you will notice that the ambient concentration is displayed and updated about once per second across the top of the screen. You will also notice that this is labeled as mask sample. The reason for this is because we are taking the sample down the clear mask tubing. This makes sure we don't have any blocks in that tubing that could potentially lead to a falsely passed fit test. Now for those of you running an N95 enabled daily check, the unit will automatically proceed to performing a classifier check. Nothing further needs to be done from our end for this check. At the end of the ambient particle check or the classifier check, we will be prompted to place the HEPA filter on the end of the clear tubing, the mask tubing. Once the HEPA filter is in place at the end of the clear tubing, we can touch Start. The unit will automatically proceed to the maximum fit factor check. Again, we are looking to make sure that the internal switching valve is switching as it should. Once complete, the individual values will be displayed. Even if the daily checks pass, I always recommend making a quick mental note of the values, especially the minimum particle check value. I bring this up because you could potentially pass your minimum particle check at, say, 1001 or 31 particles per cc, depending on your mode of operation. And though this would be a passing value, it is not necessarily a good idea to begin fit testing in that environment. Ambient particle levels will fluctuate constantly, and if it fluctuates below 1000 or below 30 particles per cc respectively during a fit test, then that fit test will have to be aborted. Go ahead and touch exit when the daily checks are finished. I'd like to take a moment to better describe why we see differences in the ambient particle concentrations between the N95 versus the non-N95 operations. On our last slide, we saw the completed daily checks, and the minimum particle check with the N95 was only 179, but without the N95, it was 3,517. Now, there's obviously a wide range of particle sizes floating around in the ambient air, but the PortaCount Pro, with no N95 enabled, is only looking at particles falling between 0.02 and 1 micron. When the N95 is enabled, the PortaCount Pro Plus only sees a small fraction of the same particles, looking at particles that are roughly between 0.03 and 0.08 microns. Since we are looking at a smaller range of particles, we can expect to see a much smaller concentration of particles. Now, why this difference has to exist is discussed in RESFIT 101. Now that we've walked through the daily checks, we're going to go through the steps I would recommend and in the order I would recommend them when troubleshooting the daily checks. We'll begin with the first daily check, the minimum particle check. If this check fails, I would recommend tapping on Cancel rather than Retry. This will allow us to take a look at the value by which we failed. In this example, 8.6, and remember, we needed a minimum of 30 because I have that N95 enabled. Here are the ambient particle levels that we recommend you try to operate your fit testing under. Now, this goes back to what I was saying previously about potentially passing the minimum particle check with lower concentrations such as 1001 or 31. With these minimum values displayed in this diagram, 100 for N95 enabled, 2000 for without, we should be able to handle almost any particle fluctuation that occurs. And by not going too far above these values, we can ensure that we have an easier time passing our zero check, and we won't flood the instrument with too many particles. At this point, we're going to focus on the lower values. We want to be mindful of our minimum particle check and just visually confirm that the value is greater than 100 or 2000. If we're failing our minimum particle check, these are the steps I recommend you follow, and again, the order that I recommend you follow them in. We're going to discuss each of these steps individually. We will first need to take a look at the alcohol and the alcohol cartridge component of the PortaCount fit testing process. A simple item would be to check the installation of the alcohol cartridge in the PortaCount unit. Just make sure that it is set in correctly. We also want to confirm that we're using reagent-grade alcohol. That is at least 99.5% pure or greater. And we also want to make sure that that alcohol is to the fill line in the fill capsule, in the alcohol fill capsule, before we insert the alcohol cartridge. This will make sure that the alcohol wick inside the alcohol cartridge has soaked up enough alcohol. And then of course we can always try a different wick. 2 different wicks are sent with each PortaCount unit, just in case you need to try a different one. But if these all check out, then we need to move on to environmental factors, which could be causing problems with our minimum particle check. There are a variety of environmental factors which could lead to low ambient particle concentrations. We want to make sure that we're doing our fit testing in a room that is smaller than 20 feet by 20 feet. Rooms larger than this can often have greater particle fluctuations because of the larger air currents, and often the particles are dispersed, creating lower concentrations. If we can close off the supply and return ventilation, we can prevent air circulations and contain the particles in the room. Since most rooms are under positive pressure, meaning the room air will move out into the hallways if the door is open, it's best to keep the doors closed. We may also want to look for ways to generate particles. I would recommend using an ultrasonic humidifier or the particle generator sent with the 8038. The ultrasonic humidifier is a fairly common option and typically run anywhere from $30 to $50 at most local pharmacies. The particle generator is sent with all 8038 PortaCounts. Keep in mind that any form of particle generator should be kept at least 6 feet from the PortaCount unit. The particles need time to dry in the air before being sampled. Consider this: if you're using the particle generator or the ultrasonic humidifier, you can often see the mist that is created by those devices. If you can see the mist, then those particles are too large for the PortaCount. This is why you need to keep those 6 feet away from the PortaCount so that they can dry out in the air to the point where we can no longer see them, but to the point where they're in the acceptable size range for the PortaCount. I would also recommend referring to the room setup module within the interactive training tutorial. This will show how to best set up a room, such as placing particle generators under supply diffusers, not underneath return grills, where the particles will simply be removed from the room before being sampled by the PortaCount. If the ambient particle count is reading very close to 0.0, and none of the previous troubleshooting has helped, then we may want to move on to trying the nozzle cleaning procedure. I would recommend that anyone attempting this procedure follow the directions laid out in the maintenance section of the manual. The idea behind this procedure is to wet the particles with a small drop of alcohol and then blow them through the nozzle that is located at the back of the alcohol cartridge cavity with a can of compressed air as shown here. This is actually a recommended maintenance procedure, though we have no recommended time interval. I would recommend that if you're in an environment with higher than normal particle concentrations, you may want to do the nozzle cleaning procedure as a matter of preventative maintenance, maybe once a month or two. If this procedure does not help, then I would immediately go back to looking for environmental causes or move on to contacting our technical support group for further assistance. The second daily check is the zero check. What happens if this does not pass? Again, I would recommend tapping on cancel in order to find out by what value we failed at. In this case, we had a set maximum of 30 and we failed with 149. Again, here's the troubleshooting process I will want to follow, and again the order that I would recommend following it in. We're going to take a closer look at each of these steps individually. The first step in troubleshooting the zero check is to look at the zero filter, also called the HEPA filter. You may want to simply try a different zero filter. 2 should have been included with each PortaCount unit. You might also try connecting 2 filters back to back, using a small piece of the blue tubing, for example. You might also try using the real-time fit factor display by holding your thumb over the end of the clear tubing. Now, this is not recommended to do for too long or to do that often, as the pump internal to the PortaCount is not designed to pull a vacuum. But it can be used sometimes as a troubleshooting tool. Particles may get through a bad filter, but they certainly shouldn't be getting through your thumb. This would prove that the zero filters were bad if the unit saw no particles while blocked by your thumb. And we're going to see how this can be used later on. As I had mentioned previously, we may also need to change our daily check settings. If you had failed the zero check with a value less than 30 particles, then we want to go back into the daily check settings window and change the maximum allowed to the default value of 30. And that is the maximum setting. The last troubleshooting tip is to take a closer look at the ambient particle concentration. Though this is not quite as common of an issue, when the ambient particle concentration is too great, greater than 400 or 8,000 respectively, you can see difficulties passing your zero check. If you're using a particle generator under these circumstances, then you may want to move it farther away from the PortaCount unit or turn it off completely. Keep in mind that a particle generator is viewed as a necessary evil. We would prefer that you not have to use one at all. And you may find that only a particle generator is necessary on certain days, or it may only be necessary in the morning. And then people get into the office, they're moving around, and you don't need a particle generator anymore. It may only be necessary on humid days. It's something that you'll have to play around with. But, for example, on a dry day, it might be producing too many particles, and again, that could cause a problem passing our zero check. Now, if you have failed the classifier check or the maximum fit factor check, our troubleshooting options are fairly limited. My first instinct would be to cycle power on the PortaCount unit and try the daily checks again. I would also verify that the ambient concentration is less than the recommended maximum. Again, we just discussed that on the previous slide. Having too many particles, over 400 with the N95, over 8,000 without the N95, can cause problems not only with the zero check, but with passing these checks as well. And then you may want to try contacting our technical support through TSI. Now I'm going to switch gears a bit and discuss the real-time fit factor display, which can be used to help troubleshoot daily check issues. The real-time fit factor display offers a continuously updated graph and values for our ambient and mass concentration, and also a continuously updated fit factor value. This can be very helpful when troubleshooting failed fit tests, which we can discuss in RESFIT 301. The concentration check is an option within the real-time fit factor display. By enabling this option, we will turn the unit into simply a particle counter, and it will display a continuous reading of the ambient concentration. This allows us to troubleshoot the ambient particle concentration issues. For the purposes of this demonstration, please leave the zero filter or HEPA filter connected to the clear mask line. If it's not connected, go ahead and attach it now. I'll have you go back to the main Activities tab and touch on Real-Time to open up the Real-Time Fit Factor window. When the Real-Time Fit Factor display is first opened, it will start taking a 30-second long ambient sample. This will be displayed in the upper right-hand corner. After 30 seconds, it will display the average ambient concentration seen. After 30 seconds, the unit will switch its internal switching valve and begin taking a sample down the clear mask tubing. This concentration will also be displayed in the upper right-hand corner just below the ambient concentration. And the fit factor being calculated will be displayed below that. The values will then be updated at once per second. Now for those of you using an 80/30 PortaCount, you are not going to see this N95 enabled option. But for those of you that do have this option, go ahead and select it now. You're going to notice a dramatic difference in the ambient particle concentration and the fit factors that are being calculated. Each time you switch between the N95 and non-N95 enabled operations, the unit will need to retake the initial 30-second ambient sample. So what does this have to do with troubleshooting our daily checks? Well, this real-time fit factor display can help us determine the efficiency or usability of our zero filter. If you have a HEPA filter connected to the mask or clear tubing, you can see how many particles would be getting through that filter. The number should stay fairly close to zero when we're using a HEPA filter. You can see some particles from time to time, but again, it should stay fairly close to zero. You can also test the unit for leaks by removing the HEPA filter and placing your thumb over the end of the clear tubing. Just as we discussed when we were troubleshooting the zero check, we could see if there was a leak in the tubing or the PortaCount, or to determine if the leak is in the zero filter. Obviously, if we block the end and the count goes to zero, then there's no leak in the PortaCount or the tubing, and the leak must be in the zero filter. Again, this isn't foolproof, but it can be a way to troubleshoot the zero check. Near the lower left-hand corner of the touchscreen, there will be an option for concentration check. Go ahead and check this box by tapping in it. You're going to notice that instead of fit factor, you will now see the ambient particle concentration displayed near the upper right-hand corner. We have now turned the PortaCount Pro into a real-time particle counter. We can use this feature to troubleshoot our ambient particle issues. If you are having trouble maintaining good ambient particle concentration, you can run in and use this function, and as you make changes to the environment, like moving the PortaCount Pro unit, turning off air circulation in the room, moving the particle generator, etc., we can see the effects of these changes very quickly without needing to go through the entire daily check process again and again until the issue is resolved. Once we do have a steady concentration, we would of course want to repeat the daily check to make sure we have a past daily check record for the day. So to sum up, we discussed the daily checks, understanding why we perform them and how we resolve many of the common issues. We also discussed the real-time fit factor display and specifically on how we use this to troubleshoot not only the zero check, but also our ambient particle check. If you have any future questions on these topics or other topics related to the PortaCount Pro Respirator Fit Tester or the FitPro Fit Test software, here are some helpful links for you to have. And again, you can direct your questions to myself as well at john.morton@tsi.com. Thank you for watching.